Hi everyone, Dan Gunner from Insane Forensics. Welcome back to Tech Talk Tuesday, where every week we try to give something to help your threat hunting and security program. And today what we're going to dive into is the area of wireless compromise. And we're going to start with talking through what a wireless attack looks like. And then in the second half, we'll talk through how you can detect wireless attacks and add it to your threat hunting efforts. So hopping right in with the relevant MITRE techniques. So we're going to use the ICS attack matrix for the primary part of this slide because they have some really good examples. So T0867, this covers wireless sniffing. And this covers the fact that when an attacker is performing wireless attacks, a lot of times they're going to sit there and they're going to pick up what they just get in the environment without connecting to the network. So in 2017, the Dallas siren incident's a good example. In this case, what happened is attackers figured out the frequency that the emergency towers in Dallas work off of, and they figured out both, hey, this is the frequency I need to send at, and these are the command messages. And it's theorized that using this, they were able to essentially broadcast rogue messages to manipulate those sirens and get them to go off when the attacker wanted them to. So this is an example of where this technique's going to be required for that end effect. Because they have to figure out like, hey, what is the spectrum? What are the messages I need to send? And to do that, a lot of times you're going to do some amount of sniffing. Now, sniffing isn't always enough. So when you hop into T0860, this is where you have wireless compromise itself. Again, this is an ICS attack matrix technique that you have in here. But in this case, so adversaries are actually compromising the network to gain access, unauthorized access to that network. A good example from the industrial side, it's an older case from the early 2000s, but there was a rogue employee in Maruchi, which is a town out in Australia. And that rogue employee basically stole the maintenance laptop that he needed to connect to these. He was disgruntled and basically manipulated the industrial control system via wireless means, again, because he had access to that. Second interesting one on wireless compromise is the Polish TV remote controller train hack. So in that case, the attacker was able to modify a TV remote and figured out how to basically modify the train system using that remote, right? In that case, right, you're very much outside of kind of the passive sniffing side, and you're very much into the compromise side. When we talk about the enterprise matrix versus the ICS attack matrix, you have T1638, adversary in the middle. Some of the examples we'll see later in this presentation, we're going to see how attackers can use common tools to basically get between your devices, right? Become an adversary in the middle. And in this case, right, their goal is to, capture the packets going between maybe your client, a phone, another device out there, and your base station, right? Your wireless router there. And once they're in between there, right, they're able to watch the flow of traffic, and they're also able to modify that flow of traffic as they want. Other one, network sniffing T1040. This is similar to the wireless sniffing that we had in T0887 in the ICS attack, but T1040 is the regular attack or the enterprise attack technique for this, right? What's interesting to note on that is T1040 does cover both wired and wireless. So if you want to read more, definitely check out the attack pages for these, both for the ICS and enterprise attack. The technique's the same in both. The approach is the same in both. It's just, OT and industrial systems are, really just a subset of a bigger technology, right? But at the end of the day, it's the same 802.11 protocols, or it's often the same other protocol, with some exceptions when you get into proprietary industrial traffic. So for the attack side, now we're going to jump into the attack side. So if you're not a red teamer, here's an overview of a very popular red teaming tool. If you are a red teamer, this is a great tool to add to your deck, especially as you get into wireless assessments. So Aircrack-ng, it's a very, very popular open source set of tools. This works on a lot of great hardware. So when you get your like Hack5 Pineapples or your Hack5 Tetras, a lot of times under the hood, you have Aircrack-ng available, or that hardware is a good start for using something like Aircrack-ng. Aircrack-ng, while Aircrack-ng is the name of one of the tools inside the suite of tools, it's also the name of the suite of tools. And hopping into some of the most important tools, so we won't cover all the tools, but these are a few you should know about. AirMon-ng, right? When we talk about wireless monitoring passively, this is how you do it. So what you'll do, you can use AirMon-ng. This will configure your wireless card in what's called monitor mode. This basically sets the card up to where it's going to listen to a lot of other traffic that it normally would drop and say, this isn't relevant to me. Also, this tool is going to be used to kill disruptive processes. So sometimes on your box, your operating system might have a network manager or some application that commonly interferes with capturing packets. AirMon-ng is going to go through, check to see what's actually running, and then kill any competing processes. So this is one you'll definitely want to be careful of, and you definitely want to test, especially if you're using this on boxes that might rely on what are some of the processes that might be labeled as disruptive. Once you run AirMon-ng, or once your card's actually set, you can do AeroDump-ng. So with this is how you can capture raw 802.11 frames. You can dump them out, and with the raw frames, you can do more with them. You can pull out the handshakes. You can look at some of the connection data. You can use AirGraph-ng, which we don't talk about here. That's a tool for actually building a graph of saying, hey, these are the access points I saw. These are the clients I saw. Here's the relationship between what's in my environment. It gives you some amount of situational awareness. But to use that, you're going to use AeroDump-ng. It also geo-encodes data. So if you're capturing on a device with a GPS card or with GPS support turned on, the cool thing is that you can actually build a Google map or some other, map, KML, other types of file to where you can say, okay, when this monitoring device was at these geocodes, this is what I saw, right? So you can build a really cool map with that. AeroDump-ng does support a variety of output formats. So we talked about raw PCAP earlier. You can also say, hey, just give me the initialization vectors and the keys that you see, right? Just give me the material that I need to crack the WEP or WPA code if that's all I care about. But most of your capture is going to be done with AeroDump-ng. Again, this is a great tool for how you do RF passive monitoring. Now, AirDrop-ng, this is where it gets, you get out of the passive realm and you actually get into the active realm. So we talked about handshakes, and what happens is you might be monitoring, or an attacker might be monitoring the, the wireless environment in an area. And if devices are normally connected to a given base station or to a given access point, the attacker might have to wait a bit for that handshake to happen again. Well, in the 802.11 spec, there's these things called deauth packets, right? And what a deauth packet does is it's basically the wireless network saying, hey, I need you to disconnect. You can actually just spoof these packets out. Using AeroDrop-ng is one case of doing it. But what this will do is force a client to re-authenticate and potentially give up that handshake. Now, something that's important to note here is that not all clients are going to request this deauth packet, right? Some clients have gotten smart that red teams and attackers actually do this. So there's not a guarantee that AirDrop-ng is actually going to deauth a client. You can also use another tool, AirReplay-ng, to just straight up spoof the fake deauth packet. But between AirDrop-ng and AirReplay-ng, those are two ways. With AirDrop-ng, though, the nice thing is you can give it provided rule logic to say, hey, based on these vendors and the MAC address, or based on this subset of MAC addresses, go ahead and automatically send the deauth packets. So, right, we talked about AeroDump, we talked about AirDrop. Now we're going to talk about Aircrack. So, with AeroDump, you've captured that handshake between two devices. With that handshake, what you can do is you can take that into Aircrack, and you can give it you can do a dictionary list attack. And regardless if this is WPA or WPA2 or WEP, All of that works actually with Aircrack-ng. Now, the suite of tools, we talked about hardware a little earlier, and we talked about the Hack5 pineapples and tetras. Those are hardware that definitely supports Aircrack-ng in the suite of tools. If you're building this on your own box, there are a lot of cards that are supported. There's a really good wiki page down at the bottom of this, or if you Google this, this is where you'll end up. But it's important when you're setting up a box to do this, that you make sure that the wireless card actually supports it. Another note as we go through this, we talked about MAC addresses with the AirDrop-ng. It's important to know that both Android and Apple devices now, for security, they're doing what they call, Apple calls it private Wi-Fi addresses. Basically, for iPhones now, it's a setting in iOS you can go in, and you can have a setting that says randomize my MAC address per network that I'm joined to, right? This adds a challenge for attackers because your MAC address on your home network, your MAC address on your office network, and your MAC address at the hotel network while you're traveling are going to be 3 different virtual MAC addresses for your device, right? So if you're an attacker, right, this is having to add a step of figuring out, okay, how do I figure out, the true MAC address or the true owner of this device? But also a challenge for this as defenders, and when we get to that, is we have to remember that the MAC addresses we see and the manufacturers we see, if it's Android or if it's iOS, Apple these days, chances are you're going to have some randomized MAC addresses in there on your Wi-Fi. So how exactly does an attack look at this? And we talked about this a little bit previously, but I wanted to get it on one slide, so hopefully you could follow along. So step 1, right? We're going to start AirMon-ng, right? And we're going to monitor packets going around in the environment. Step 2, right? That's going to take us for waiting for that handshake, right? So we're going to wait for a client to come along, and we're going to wait to see that handshake. We could also de-authenticate or try to de-authenticate clients if we want. But eventually, right, we need to see when we run error replay ng, or when we see in our AirMon client, we need to say, hey, I see that I captured a handshake off of the SSID I care about, right? Step 3, so we have the handshake now from step 2. What we're going to do is use a large word list to crack out that pre-shared key, right? This step could take a while depending on how complicated the key is. Is it in the dictionary? How big is the cracking rig that the attacker is actually being used? But eventually that'll lead you to step 4, right? In this, which is use that cracked pre-shared key to just connect to the network. This is kind of the summarized 4-step, what the end-to-end process looks like. Now, hopping to the defensive side, right? We've talked a lot about the attack side. We've talked a lot about the pen testing side. How do we detect this, right? 4 approaches we're going to propose today. So the first approach in the top left, right? We can look for rogue beacon frames, right? And what this is going to find is rogue base stations targeting clients. What a beacon frame is it's part of the 802.11 specification, and it's basically how access points advertise out, hey, I am part of, Hotel X's Wi-Fi, right? Connect to me, right? And then clients decide, oh, hey, that's one of my preferred networks. I'll connect into it, right? The nice thing in here is that in Wireshark, if you do that air dump, if you capture PCAPs, you can actually filter down with the Wireshark filter wlan.fc for function code .type _subtype equals 0x8. That's going to find all of your beacon frames in the environment, right? You could automate this further too and say, okay, I'm going to monitor the physical premises of an area I care about, and I'm going to look for new clients sending beacon frames, right? Because again, if as an attacker is performing these attacks, they're going to have to generate beacon frames if they're trying to connect or convince one of your legitimate clients to connect to their rogue or illegitimate base station, right? Beacon frames is one way looking for those rogue access points. Approach 2, right? So we could look for rogue probe and request response packets, right? Again, this is another frame within the 802.11 spec. What this is looking for clients reconning for connected devices by SSID, right? And so what a client here will do is send out probe requests and say, hey, I'm looking for this network, right? And they're going to get a response back. Again, this is another function code on the same filter you can look at that instead of 8, it's 5 and 6, right? But again, we can begin to look for clients that might also be looking for specific devices by SSID. Approach 3, we can monitor for those deauth packets, right? So we talked about capturing the handshake, and we talked about how the attacker can either wait until a handshake actually happens, or they can try to force a handshake to capture it early on. This is function code type subtype 0xc. Again, completely monitored thing you can monitor for with Wireshark, just in the 802.11 frame. Again, deauth packets, if you're not expecting these could be weird. And again, you could look for, in a given physical area, you could look for deauth packets suddenly being sent, right? Approach 4, assuming you kind of fail at all 3 or you don't get a conclusive result at the first 3, that's when you also want to do your network monitoring and look for rogue devices that are joining in, right? These earlier steps, we're looking earlier in the 802.11 protocol for specific actions. But ultimately, if a device connects, you definitely want to realize, like, hey, what access point is it connected to, right? When did it connect? Do I, understand this device? If it's a corporate device, do I have a MDM, a mobile device manager, or something else on it? Detecting wireless attacks, as you can see, we can do it early on at kind of the 802.11 level, or you can do it kind of in the traditional endpoint level at the end. So again, this was a quick overview on wireless attacks. We started off talking about the attack techniques, then we hopped into what it looks like on the pen testing or offensive or attack side, and then we talked about how you can defend against it. Hopefully this was helpful today. Thanks for joining in, and we hope to see you back next week.